All right, folks, I have 6:30. We'll get started here, just to be conscious of your time tonight. I want to welcome everyone again. I'm your superintendent, Aaron Johnson, and I have a number of guests here with me tonight. We're going to take a moment and go around the room and introduce ourselves. But I just want to first kind of set the context here with you. And so, again, this is a Zoom webinar. We're starting this series up, and it's called Community Conversations. And this is really an extension that we stole from the coffee, the principal community or principal family coffee hours that we have in our buildings. And so we've been thinking about this for some time, and we thought that there would be the perfect opportunity to get this kickstarted and underway. So it's a little different than like a Facebook town hall because we want to invite you to interact with us. So tonight we have Mr. DeVeronica, our Director of Public Information, with us. Again, he'll introduce himself here in a minute. But as we go through, we have a short presentation with some bullet points, but we really want to share and then talk and listen to you and with you about what's going on in the district. And so a major focus, as it should be this year and continuing and has been, is equity, diversity, and inclusion here at West Irondequoit. So as we go through this, we have different segments of the conversation we'll introduce here in a minute. And, we have those bullet points. And then if you have something to say, either to share, maybe a question, maybe some input and feedback, whatever it is, just raise your hand within the webinar here, and Mr. DeVeronica will activate your sound so you can have a conversation with us. Okay. You can also post questions and answers in the Q&A box if you see at the bottom of your screen. And I already see one coming in. Thanks, Becky. Will we share the PowerPoint? We'll get into that. And as we go around, I'll have Mr. DeVeronica address that. But again, before we get into the conversation, let's go around the horn here and introduce our team. So I'm going to turn it over to the person below me on my screen. That's Kim Cristal. Kim, if you just want to introduce yourself and then popcorn it away.
Sure thing. Hi, my name is Kim Cristal. I'm the Social Studies Curriculum Supervisor at West Irondequoit, and I'll pass it on over to Chrissy Miga.
Hey, Kim, real quick. Can each of you say a little bit more just about more than just your title, a little bit more about what you do in the district and maybe some of your history here? Not everybody who's joined us tonight may have a good handle on that. So thanks.
Will do. So this is my 4th year here at West Irondequoit. I've worked here in the district supporting social studies instruction. In addition, we've done a tremendous amount of work around implementing more culturally responsive instructional practice across social studies, but also across other disciplines as well. And I've been able to support teachers in expanding their repertoire with regard to instructional practices that are inclusive, that are student-based, pushing students to engage in critical thinking, civic discourse, all of that really, really good stuff. And it's been amazing working here. So it's really been a pleasure. And I'll pass it over to Mrs. Miga.
Thanks, Kim. Hi, everyone. I'm Chrissy Miga. I'm the K-6 Director of Instruction. This is my 15th year in the district and 16th in education. And so having spent the majority of my time here in West Irondequoit, started out as an elementary teacher and then worked over at our TLC, or Teacher Learning Center, and then moved into administration. And so have really enjoyed just working in West Irondequoit, not only with my colleagues here tonight, but with the community to really just at all moments make sure that our students are achieving the most and being as successful as they can be, and really have been focused, along with my colleagues here today, on the phrase all means all. So really excited to dive even more deeply into our conversations around equity and diversity, so we can tell you a little bit more about the work we've been doing. And so now I'll pass it to Karen Finter.
Thanks, Mrs. Miga. Hi, everyone. My name is Karen Finter. I'm the Director of Instruction for grades 7 through 12. I have been a part of the West Irondequoit teaching and learning community for the past 25 years. Started as a 7th and 8th grade science teacher at Dake. Shifted also, like Mrs. Miga. I served at the Teacher Learning Center, supervising and supporting professional development for teachers K-12 in the district. Was a science supervisor at the secondary level for grade 7 through 12, bringing in new science standards and really enriching that program. And now as 7-12 director of instruction, really working to support the teaching and learning at Dake and the high school through professional development, through the revision and implementation of our curriculum, and really engaging with the leaders in those buildings and our amazing curriculum development team to really bring rich resources to all kids and make sure that that access is guaranteed and viable for all. We're very excited to share this work as Kim and Mrs. Miga said. We've really, things are starting to coalesce and really come together, not happening in isolated pockets, but really with a clear vision and an umbrella. And we're very happy to share this work with you tonight. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Mr. Joe Jackson, next.
Hello, everyone. My name is Joe Jackson. I am the Supervisor of Counseling, Student Equity, and Wellness. This is my first year in West Irondequoit. I believe it's my 16th year in education. I have an elementary teaching degree, but I've spent most of my time working as a school psychologist, elementary, middle school, and high school levels, behavior specialist. And I've also led some work with restorative practices in other districts in the past, including I've worked in Webster, North Syracuse, briefly in Gates Chi-Li and Churchville Chi-Li. Part of my work in the district is overseeing the K-12 counseling plan. I am the district trauma, illness, and grief coordinator. I'm working with my colleagues here to support wellness in the district and our social emotional learning committee, and also co-facilitating and helping lead conversations about equity, diversity, and inclusion in West Irondequoit. I will pass it back to Mr. DeVeronica.
My name is Jeff DeVeronica. I'm the Director of Public Information. This is my 3rd year with the school district. I used to be a journalist for many, many years. It's interesting seeing how everything operates on this side of the fence. It's also fascinating because I don't think from the outside you understand how a school district is like its own community, and people have their roles, and it's like a well-oiled machine much of the time. And certainly we've needed to be that way during the pandemic. So I'm excited to see what we're going to be able to do here this evening in our conversation. I will tell you that I'm having some trouble seeing people raising their hands with my screen being shared. So I will do my best to get to you and bring you on to talk. But just so everyone knows, okay, I just saw Kelly raise her hand, but it didn't stay on my screen. Your camera will never be on, folks. It's just your audio. There's no camera for attendees. So very good. Who's next? Anyone left?
No, I think I'll take it back, Jeff. I think that's everybody. So I appreciate the introductions here. And just to review, if you can raise your hand, or if you have something to say, just raise your hand as a participant. If it goes unnoticed, then just make a note in the Q&A and we'll make sure that we get to you, because this is really conversational, okay? And something that we noticed through our journey this year, obviously communication is always, critical, but with everything that's happened this year, it's certainly elevated the importance, but also drawn our attention more closely to how critical that is. So in an effort to share and to draw people into the conversation, we're here tonight. And what we have prepared for you is just some talking points, really. Like I said, we're going to hit 3 kind of core areas that are happening across the district here. One where we're focused on engaging stakeholders. And I'll invite some of my colleagues to share some points and then open that up to a dialogue. Then we'll move on to some of the curricular shifts that are happening within the district, again, looking at a conversation. And then to round it off and to close out our time together, we'll talk about some of the impactful practices that are happening across the district and some of the key initiatives related to that. So with that, I'm going to turn it over here to engaging stakeholders. And I think Karen and Chrissy are really going to carry the bulk of this because they're out in front of some of this work within the district. So ladies, if I can turn it to you and take it away.
Thanks. And Jeff, yep, there we go. So as Dr. Johnson mentioned, we're going to take you through a couple major categories around our work with diversity, equity, and inclusion. But again, please jump in if you have questions or want to know more about something that we mentioned. And so we're going to go through these, but each of them have a particular purpose and really some great work behind them. So Mr. DeVeronica, if you want to go to the next slide, we'll start with engaging stakeholders.
Sure. So really, one of the perhaps newest committee groups that we're engaging with, it started really over the summer. Having a call across the district, across our community, to have stakeholders come together to really look at how are we representing for students, how are we inclusive in our programming, providing equitable access, looking at and really celebrating our diversity. So the Coalition for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion came together again over the summer, really coalescing in September, really coming together, setting a vision for its work, making sure that we're creating an equitable, accepting, transparent, and inclusive culture for all students, staff, families, and community members. We have an amazing group of folks on the committee, 37 members, including students, parents, teachers, Board of Education representatives, and school administrators to really help drive the work. And we're starting this work using a building equity taxonomy. It's really having us go through different layers of our institution, looking at data, looking at artifacts, using other tools to assess the degree in which we are seeing equity play out, where we're seeing how diversity is celebrated, and what are potential guiding questions to really drive that work even deeper, so that as we're building new programs, bringing in new curricula, we have that framework to fall back on. We've met 3 times over the course of the year so far. We have another meeting coming up in a few weeks, but we really are excited to have this group come together and celebrate this work. Joe, I don't know, as a co-chair of that committee, is there anything you want to share?
Yeah, I think you captured very well where we're at, Karen, and where we're going. And I'd like to think that we're facilitating the work because I really believe that each member and their voice is really helping lead the work. And again, it's going to help generate a framework that we're going to embed at the inception of everything we do, making sure that equity is at the forefront of our conversation, and it's not something we're thinking at after we've developed a practice or a program. So for example, when we talk about transitioning students from our K-3 to our 4-6 schools, and we start to have those conversations, this framework is going to help identify those really essential understanding, those essential questions that we want to ask ourselves to make sure that we are being equitable and we are aligning with our vision and encouraging inclusion, diversity, and equity for all students.
Joe, if I can just, oh, Dr. Johnson, were you gonna...
No, I think we're going to address the same thing. We have a question, right? Is that what you were looking at, Chrissy?
Yeah, I was looking at the question just to connect it even to the work of the coalition.
You mind if I pull her up, Chrissy?
Yeah, go ahead.
I'd love to have a conversation. So Jeff, if you can pull Jen up. Hi, Jenna.
Hi, can you hear me?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Wonderful. So I don't know if you can see my question. I was just wondering about the definition of diversity, because a lot of times when we hear that word diversity, our minds go straight to the Black community, Latinx community, but it's so much bigger than that. So I was just, the 2 particular areas that I was thinking about was students who are in foster care or adopted, and how the social studies and science curriculum addresses that, like, because if they have no biological connections to their parents, sometimes in science, or in social studies activities, it comes up because, you know, you do family trees or bring in a baby picture, and students in foster care or adopted students might not have that. And then the other one was connections to students with disabilities. I know that in our community, we have a lot of students who are, a lot of families who have deaf family members. And I just wonder if sign language could be a language that's offered every year to students to learn.
You know, Jenna, you make some really good points. I'm going to open it up to the group here. And again, stay on the horn here. We'll have a conversation. But what you asked is exactly something that we had a conversation about when we started this coalition. You know, at the foreground right now are students and families of color, right? And so, so we're focused on that because there's a sense of urgency around that, as there should be. But we want to make sure that we're not losing sight of, as you explained, the breadth of diversity. I mean, it's more than just obviously race. And as we broaden out this conversation, our hopes is to make sure that we're inclusive with those things. And again, I'll invite some of my colleagues to share some of those examples. But I want you to know that this is a start, and our intent is to make sure that through the conversations here and through the work, we're supporting all of our students. And that was something I learned here at Western Ironquoit pretty quickly, is that one of our calls to action here is all means all. And we are committed, I see it in our folks every day, to making sure that every student, we support them individually with their unique needs, and help them to offer up all of their special gifts and talents and the heritages they bring, the cultures that they bring to the conversation, so that we can all benefit. And I really like your comment around sign language, and that was something new that I learned. We do rotate that through, but I'm going to turn it over to the directors and some other folks to share a little bit more.
Yeah, and I'm gonna kind of answer that, and I'm gonna kind of answer. I saw Maggie ask a question, and they're intertwined, so we'll jump off both. Is building equity taxonomy. That's something that's pulled from the literature and research by Fisher, Frey, Pumpian, and I believe Smith. And there's a book actually called Building Equity. And within that taxonomy, they identify the key tenets of equity, right? So we have our own vision for it, but we have some supporting research that helps us think about what does that mean? And at the core of that is physical integration. So one of the first activities that we did after identifying our norms and our guidelines within the coalition was to start to dive into the base of that and think about, what does physical integration look like? What are some of the questions that we want to ask ourselves? And how can we support all students? And physical integration meaning students regardless of the race, their ethnicity, ability or disability, socioeconomic status, and beyond. So part of the first activity that we actually did was looking at, for example, our New York State education report card and starting to look at that data and ask some questions. We started to look at our physical representation on our websites, within our schools, to think about who's represented within that population, and to ask some other questions that make sure we're representing, again, as Dr. Johnson said, all students within the West Irondequoit community and school district. So, colleagues jump in here certainly, but we've really started that work by evaluating all people within our districts.
Hey, Joe, would it be helpful if, could you just look up online a nice link for the building equity taxonomy, and we can post it for folks? But I want to go back to the initial question, because I saw Becky chimed in on that. Folks, do we have a little bit more from the panel to say about diversity and how we define that, and what our intentions are around that?
Yeah, I would love to speak to that, especially around the question of social studies and science as well. And diversity is really defined within our district as including all students from all different backgrounds, but not just from a singular background, recognizing the intersectionality of identity. So even though you might have a student who might fit into one of those buckets of identity, they're also going to fit into lots of others. And so our hope is that through diversifying our literature and text selection, through going through our social studies and ELA and really all of our curriculum and making sure that all students are represented in a positive light and that they can draw positive connections for their own identity. And so that goes far beyond race and ethnicity and includes special needs, family structures, LGBTQ+, and more than I could possibly list, basically anything that you could think of. And then on top of that, it's also going to looking at how we can implement those instructional practices that fit every student's unique needs. So being really student-driven, student-centered when we're looking at intervening for a student learning gap or emotional need or whatever the need might be, really engaging in discourse with that student and making sure that student's voice is heard so that we can effectively reach them and help them to grow and learn.
So I just want to take it back to Jenna. Jenna, how do you feel? Can we offer up more information around that, or do you feel good before we move on to the next question?
No, I'm really encouraged to hear that the definition you're working from is a broad one. Like you said at the very beginning of your response, that right now there are certain groups that are kind of in the forefront of everyone's mind, but it is important to keep in mind that it's a big definition.
Agreed. Thank you. I thought I saw, Jeff, somebody ask if they could ask a question before.
Yeah, Stephen Tiroli.
Stephen?
We're going to bring Stephen on right now. Yep.
There you go. Thanks.
Stephen, you should be on, sir. Stephen Tiroli, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, you're all good. Go ahead with your questions.
Thanks. Thanks so much. My question has to do with equity, and specifically, what are we talking about when we use the term equity? Are we talking about an equality of opportunity across the diversity of people groups within the school district? Or are we talking about equality in terms of particular outcomes? In other words, is the goal of the district or the committee that is looking at promoting equity, is one of the goals to achieve greater equality in terms of opportunity, or achieve equality in terms of particular outcomes or metrics or participation? Or I'd just be interested. I think it's important when we have discussions and we use these terms to make sure there's an understanding of what we mean when we use these terms, because equity can mean so many things to so many different people. So if you could elaborate on that, I'd really appreciate it.
Thanks, Stephen. Does anybody want to jump on that before, or I can?
I can.
Okay.
So I think that's a really great question. And I do think it's really important because there are so many different definitions. And I think it's an answer, though, to yes of both of those points that you make. So when we talk about equity, you've heard us use that phrase, all means all. We are talking first about access. So we want all of our students to have the ability to be successful and to be able to give our teachers the tools that helps them to make our curriculum accessible through specific instruction, and then therefore giving all of our students that chance and opportunity to achieve whether it's the grade level standards or some of the social emotional goals that we have. And so when we talk about the graduates of West Irondequoit, we want to make sure that we've presented a continuum of instruction where every student had the opportunity to reach their highest potential and to be able to participate in the world very successfully because of the work that we've done within the district. So, yep, first, we're definitely talking about access. And then that also, though, leads to the other part that you pointed out as far as equity among outcomes. We've done a lot of curricular work that you'll hear about in the next slide, where we've made shifts so that our staff really understands what is most essential for students, and that those, and Mrs. Finter used this phrase earlier, this term guaranteed and viable. You want curriculum that all fourth graders are leaving with the same knowledge and the same standards that they have mastered, knowing though that every student is going to bring something different to the table. So we have to know our students, honor their voice, and build their identity to be successful towards those same standards at the end. And I don't know if some of my colleagues want to add to that.
I'm just wondering, Karen and Chrissy, and I know Joe, you're on the committee as well. Can you just lay out the priorities of the committee specifically? I'm not sure if that was part of the question or if that would be helpful, but as far as that coalition, what is the mission of that coalition?
Yeah, and maybe someone, as I'm speaking, can pull up the actual verbatim vision that we created and responded to. But it was kind of captured on the first slide there, and really the goal being that we're going to develop a framework that's going to evaluate, an equitable framework that's going to evaluate our practices, our programs, and our procedures, again, going back to that being at the forefront of everything that we do, and something that we can use as a tool to evaluate the things that we already have in place. The actual vision statement is a little bit longer than what we captured on the slide, but that's the essence of what we're trying to do. And again, it's really identifying with the building equity taxonomy those essential understandings and essential questions.
Karen or Chrissy, do you guys want to chime in? Because I do have it up.
I would also say that the coalition really is an opportunity, and I saw another question in the Q&A around the representation of the committee. And while we really can't run every component of curriculum through the committee to really provide opportunities to get input from members of the community. And so as part of the process to select members, because we had over, I think it was over 60 to 75 people that wanted to be a part of the work. And that size of a committee is really kind of unwieldy. But so really, what were the attributes and who were the voices that we really wanted to have to be able to lend us their perspective as parents, as parents of color, as members of the LGBTQ community, members of higher education, families with students that have disabilities. And so how did we arrive at that? We had a small subgroup of staff really kind of look at the applications, if you will, a couple of questions that we asked folks, and really kind of worked from there, and bringing that group together. So not only to create that sort of framework, as Joe mentioned, but also to be a sounding board and to share insights as we look at data. And to your question, Stephen, around some of the outcomes, when we provide all students that equal opportunity, then we should see in our outcomes, depending on what we're measuring and how we're defining outcome, we should see students rising to those opportunities and taking advantage of them. The beauty of education right now is that there are lots of different pathways, as Mrs. Miga mentioned, for our graduates. And we want to make sure that we are holding that door wide open for them to really realize their potential in whatever it might be, and through our K-12 system to be able to really kind of hone in on, these are the things that, as a citizen, I have been exposed to and can think for myself around, to really be a contributing member of society in a way that works for them and their family.
Thanks, Karen. And embedded in that also is how we're how we're attracting, recruiting, and retaining a diverse workforce here in our schools. And so that's probably the trickiest of the goals there that we have as a coalition as a district. So we could talk a little bit more about that, but I wonder if that was also embedded in some of that questioning as well about who we have at the table. But Jeff, if you could bring up Elizabeth, I think that, she poses a really good question there, and maybe we can have a little deeper conversation around that.
Elizabeth, your mic is open if you'd like to speak. If you don't want to, that's okay too.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. And thank you all for having this meeting and opportunity to engage. I just think it's very important that the voices of the individuals we're trying to ensure feel that they have equitable opportunities and are able to be in a place where they feel safe and comfortable and have their differences appreciated, are included. And I hesitate when I see a group that doesn't reflect that in front of me to say, are those voices there? Because that I think is really important. And I say this as a woman who is white and I have Black children. So I have learned from my own experiences the things that I would have missed, the things that I didn't even realize I was picking up on until I saw their impact on my children. And that's with the best of intentions. So it's not to be critical of the group that's here, and I appreciate your efforts tremendously. I just am hoping that we do have voices there that can say, hey, you may not have noticed this, but these are the media images that my kids are seeing, or you may not have realized this, but every time there's a discussion about racism, everybody looks to the Black kids in the class to explain, why racism isn't good. I think those experiences need to be at the forefront of the changes that you're trying to make, because those are the voices we need to hear.
Well, you make some really great points, Elizabeth, and I'm with you. I mean, like I said, diversifying our staff is probably going to be the tallest order for us. But in doing so, what we can do in the meantime, as you had mentioned, is making sure that we are strengthening our level of awareness, right? Making sure that we're including a diverse set of voices, whether it be construction of curriculum, review of our code of conduct, conversations like this, so that we're called out and we have a 360-degree perspective of these initiatives, of these conversations, and efforts. And I'll say this, I love what you pointed out there about a situation in class, because I think that's reflective of the journey, right? And so our administrative team is reading this book, Unconscious Bias in Schools. And one of the first things that I made note of here is that it's really, really hard for educators. And I shared this earlier today, so at least a couple of you have already heard this, but it stuck with me. As educators, we don't intend to be biased. And I really, truly believe that. Our staff are not intentionally building biases into their instruction. But as you pointed out, there's one, right? And so we need to build that level of awareness, accept the fact that even though that we didn't intend that it's there, so that we can recognize that and correct that moving forward. So thank you for voicing that.
Well, I appreciate what you're doing, because I agree with you. I don't think the intention is there at all. I think the intention is good. I think the educators are doing their best. And I think it's just important for all of us to realize, whether we're aware of it or not, we've kind of been ingrained, if we are not people of color, to see things a certain way. And we really have to work hard to recognize that that is not the experience that other people have, and what we can do about that. So I appreciate your efforts. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see. Let me read Mrs. Tuff's comment here. Can we speak a bit about the plans to make sure reading is accessible to all, recognizing that many students are struggling readers and have learning disabilities? Also, the children of color have an increased risk of not being properly identified. So we have some well-informed folks in the room on that topic. So I'm going to turn it right over to them.
Yeah, so I really appreciate this question because we have had a lot of work over the past couple of years around science-based reading practices. And we sometimes I feel like that that focus can be really viewed as a focus just on literacy, but we in the district really view this as a major piece of our movement for equity. And it's because of this question and how it's posed. This is exactly right. How can you speak to the plans to make sure reading is accessible to all? So, it is our jobs as educators to make sure that our students are able to read fluently. And that's one of the keystones to success for our students. So we have started to train really all of our elementary staff and then some of our secondary staff beyond in science-based reading practices. It really starts from an article by Dr. Louisa Moats called Reading is Rocket Scientist that actually came out in 1995, but was for different reasons not widely adopted at that time, but that research has stuck around. So this is really an in-depth, well thought out, well-researched concept of helping to build 5 components of reading for students, and particularly their phonemic awareness and phonics. And I won't get too much into the nitty gritty. I could literally talk about this all night. But the point being that we are trying to, again, when we talked about equity from the previous question, we are trying to make it so that every student can read. So it is about what are the tools, what are the best instructional practices to provide those students. And we've really gone across the board in our professional development of teachers. We have so our intervention teachers that, yes, work with students, but also work with staff to help coach and train them in these science-based reading practices. And we've done district-wide PD for our teachers who teach reading. So obviously all elementary and then some of our secondary to better understand these practices. And so it's been a multi-year effort and we're still continuing because we know that anything that's going to stick is something that you have to do over and over to make sure that it really is something that's ingrained in our practice. So we have been making great strides, but are learning more and more about not only those best practices, but the best practices tied to our specific groups of students. And so this year we've really started to take that to the next level. For example, some of our English language learner students. Yep, we've got that good solid foundation of what it takes to help all readers, but specifically for those readers who are speaking multiple languages and not seeing that at all as a deficit, but what a gift they're bringing and how are we going to leverage that to help them to be even stronger readers. So I really appreciate that question because I absolutely see that as part of this greater diversity, equity, inclusion initiative.
Karen, Chrissy, and Kim, can you say a little bit more about the Strong Voices Project and the Heritage Months and some of the work that you're doing around that, around the specific literature that's embedded in their curricula?
Yeah, sure. So, it really, when we think about how some of the equity work really started, even thinking about the major shifts in social studies curriculum and instruction based on the social studies framework, which Kim will share in just a bit. But also parallel to that is really looking at texts and looking at representation and having rich, meaningful opportunities for students to celebrate a variety of different heritage months, aside from just trivia on the announcements in any given week for Black History Month or for Women's History Month, those kinds of things. And so how do we really do that as a rich and deep experience, but also include the voice of students in the planning and thoughtful conversation around how that work might look and what it how it might roll out. And so Strong Voices, Chrissy, do you want to touch base on that around K6?
Sure, and then I'll turn it over to Ms. Cristal. So one of the things, and I see we have some questions coming up about student experiences, and really this first step in our Strong Voices project was to help to give students a voice in understanding the world around them. So we've implemented this year some read alouds that are tied to questions, pre-populated questions that teachers can engage students in about some of the topics that we want them to be able to discuss and engage in class in a safe space, and also have the teachers feel supported to start having those conversations. So we created really discussion guides to not only go with texts that have a diversity of representation throughout them. And so that is something that we're doing this year. And Ms. Cristal, do you want to speak a little bit though to some of the other layers that we've laid even before this year?
Sure. So yes, so I want to echo all the work that has been mentioned and dive a little bit more deeply into some of the work around the curricular shifts, specifically with social studies and ELA as well. Earlier, I had mentioned the goal is to really ensure that every single student is having a positive experience and that their identity is being positively constructed through their learning and daily through their learning, not just in a specific month or week. So before we even got to looking at our heritage months, we really went through our curriculum and figured out how to ensure that we are including space for students to voice and voice their identity, make connections between themselves and the world around them, find their agency and voice as a civic member of society, and really exercise that, that component of their learning regularly. And then beyond that, we are now looking to incorporate Heritage Months as an opportunity to really get students in the planning. So earlier this year, in working with a couple of our seniors, Ethan Reister and Tyra Oglesby, we collaborated together to figure out how we can make these month celebrations more than a surface deep experience, but something that is authentic, something that students want to engage in deeply, and that effectively drives their expanded awareness. So it's quite a tall order. It's definitely not something that we're going to knock out of the park per se, first year out, although I have been so impressed with the ideas that the students have come up with and what we've been able to accomplish even with COVID and everything going on. But they've really leaned into the opportunity to take a leadership role in this, and not just at the high school, also at Dake, working with their student government advisors. Dake students are looking to bring students together to learn together on their own time and figure out a way to really raise their agency as younger learners as well. And then at the K-6 level, we're really, like Chrissy had mentioned, we're really looking to figure out how can we engage our youngest learners in some of these really important conversations that we know they are aware of, issues that are going around them, and using literature and texts to really ground that work.
So I want to recognize the two hands we have up, and we're going to get to you here very, very shortly. But before we do that, Mr. DeVeronica, can you pull up the question that's been waiting? Pull up the person with a question in the Q&A, please.
I think that's Noelle, yeah.
Thank you.
Yep, 1 second.
Hello, this is Noelle. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Thank you very much for organizing this event tonight. And I just want to say that I've been very impressed with the efforts that the district has made thus far, being an alumni myself, and I have a child at the high school and at Iroquois. I definitely have seen some of these things in practice already this year. So do want to give credit to the district for really working hard on this. Something that I'm looking for a little bit more information on, in addition to what had just been spoken to around creating some safe spaces for conversation, is alluding back to one of the earlier questions and points around not having as much diversity in the staff as we would ideally like to have within the district. I just wanted to ensure there are being some trainings and professional development for the teachers as well to help guide some of those conversations using the discussion guides and other things where students who may have a negative experience or a negative reaction to something that's either happening in the world or being talked about in the classroom feel like they have a safe space to share, either one-on-one with the teacher or in a separate, community group of students that would be considered a safe space, or, how can we support them in the classroom? So curious if there's activity around that as well.
Yeah, do you mind if I use an example, one of the most recent ones with the insurrection at the Capitol?
Please.
And I think that again, I'll invite Karen, Chrissy, Kim, and probably Joe to just unpack a little bit of kind of this, what we put in place as far as the strategies, supports, and some of the guidance we provided for staff.
Yeah, and it's kind of a good segue into our work coming up with some of the work that's happening with the Social Emotional Learning Committee, some that's happening with the Coalition for Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and it kind of shifts over to our next slide, I believe, which is some of our work with restorative practices. As we start to move up the building, the second component of the building equity taxonomy is specifically around social emotional engagement, restorative practices, a welcoming climate, attendance policies. But thinking specifically what you're hitting on here is the idea of building community, and when harm has been done, how do we create a space and create opportunities either one-to-one or in a larger group to have some of these conversations. So as it stands right now, and just to give some context of my experience with this, I have been trained in community building restorative practices, restorative discipline. I've done the work in classrooms. I've done the work repairing harm. I've been part of and helped lead the initiative with some other colleagues, in Webster. And that's included consulting with East, with Partners in Restorative Initiative, Rush Henrietta, and BOCES together, a little bit more about their long-term implementation plan. And really it comes back to a three-phased plan. The first being around building our capacity and our awareness of what restorative practices is. And it comes back to that idea of community. We want to protect and strengthen certain aspects of our community and culture, and there's other things that we want to change and alter. So again, that we're supporting all students. And as it stands right now, we've run our first cohort through prior to COVID. And there's other people in the district who've also been trained. And as it stands right now, we're really trying to make a concerted effort to expose the kids to restorative practices and community building, to expose the teachers, and really start to get word out there about what it is and build that community. In the coming months, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be pulling our district level leadership team together, identifying a vision, talking about how we can integrate equity and cultural responsiveness and create that safe space and community at the inception of what we're trying to do. And some of the things, the key components of it are already there. So for example, the peak time is an example of a time uninterrupted within the day where teachers are connected with kids for 30 minutes to start to build that community. And the other piece of what I'm hearing you say is how do we repair harm? How do we create the safe space? So the other thing that we're going to look to do, and we're starting to do some of this now, is think about what that phase 2 is. And phase 2 is where we have greater capacity, more people doing the community building, but also taking a collaborative problem solving approach to working with kids and having those conversations, either one-to-one or to help repair that harm between students or larger groups as students feel comfortable, and making sure that they're supported in that work. So we're going to continue to identify a long-term plan for that and continue to work towards that. But we already have, and we're going to continue to solicit input from different groups. So for example, we talked about restorative practices briefly, and we'll be revisiting with the coalition to make sure that we have some of the representation from diverse groups to ensure that, again, no party is an afterthought, right? All means all. Let's make sure that we're thinking of all students as we build that community and think about how we're going to create a safe space to repair harm after harm has been done. Once we get really far down the road, we'll start to integrate some of the students to be able to help facilitate those conversations as well. That's a very compressed version of it. Noelle, does that help answer the question?
Very much, yes. Thank you. It's good to hear the short-term and long-term plan around that. So I appreciate that. If I could just add an additional question real quickly around a comment that you made for, building out the phases and getting input. If you as a parent have an idea or feedback around the DE&I initiative specifically, what is or who is the best avenue to share that feedback? Is it directly at the school level with the principals, your child's teacher? Is there like a central DE&I mailbox? What's the best channel for that?
For feedback regarding this plan altogether?
Yeah, for feedback around anything diversity, equity, inclusion at the district.
I'd like to think that we do this work all together. I'd say if you do have feedback, I'd say send it to Dr. Johnson, Karen Finter, Chrissy, Kim, myself. My title is Supervisor of Counseling, Student Equity, and Wellness, but I can assure you that I don't do any of this work by myself. So,
great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. Anyone have something to add before we move on to the next question?
Kim, I wonder if you might want to bring in, kind of around Noelle's question around student discourse and safe spaces. I know that you invested a lot of time and effort in terms of staff support around some of the conversations that happen in social studies classrooms in particular. And I don't know if you want to share some of that, because I saw it play out in action on January 7th, and it was incredibly powerful. To see students supported to think through the evidence that was presented to them and shared with them. So
good call, Karen. Take it away, Kim.
Okay, yes. So the social studies department in particular, but definitely teachers outside of that department, broadly speaking, have really sunk their teeth into how do they create a space within the classroom where students can really engage in discourse about the issues that are around them. So thinking about, for example, January 7th, the day after the riots in the Capitol, we had teachers across the entire district helping students to process, letting students ask the questions that they needed to ask. And one of the biggest components of that training is helping teachers to understand that they don't need to have all of the answers, but instead helping students to ask the questions and learn the tools to find the answers, and really building up their agency as being critical consumers of information and engaging in that conversation with their peers and with their teachers. The other component of that too is really helping teachers to moderate when things get a little bit heated, because that certainly can happen, especially if you imagine a government class, say, leading up to the election in November. Teachers have engaged in tremendous professional development through department meeting, as well as through some of the professional developments mentioned on this slide, to help them have the tools to really facilitate discussion and help students to understand that you can disagree and be respectful of one another, and that the goal isn't always to convince another, but to listen to understand the other, and help them to engage in a conversation as opposed to a debate and an argument. So work is ongoing. This work seems to never be done for sure, but definitely a lot of movement has happened. And then kind of overlapping with Joe, using the community circle structures and some of the other restorative components within academic capacity through academic circles has also been a really strong tool that we had a cohort of teachers and myself go through training with partners in restorative practices last year. And teachers have really brought that into their classrooms, not just in social studies and science and ELA and math, even in social studies for sure, to help facilitate these kinds of conversations.
Thank you. Okay, let me move on to the next question. So, Jeff, if you can bring Becky up. Becky's been patient. I think Lorian was there, but Lorian dropped her hand. But if she would still like to ask a question, we can bring her up. But in the meantime, let's bring Becky up, please.
Becky should be all set. Good evening, Becky.
Hey there. Hopefully it's not too loud. I am dog sitting at the moment. But so just the nutshell of my question is, I am actually a teacher myself in another district. So I am very appreciative of all the steps that are being taken. My daughter is young. She's in kindergarten in Irondequoit. So seeing all this start when she's so young and knowing that she's growing into it is amazing. So I guess my main question just revolves around at the elementary level, particularly what the vision of how some of these will look like, and how is it going to be like, I know you spoke of like books with good discussion and like things being prepared for teachers, which I know they'll very much appreciate. I'm just wondering what the like expectation will end up being. Like, will every kindergarten in the district like be expected to hear a book, or is it going to be optional, or like what kinds of trainings? I'm just curious of what the process will end up looking like. I know it's still very early in the process, but I was just from the outside wondering what that would look like.
Great question. Chrissy and really Kim, do you guys want to step in there?
Yeah, thanks. So definitely those are great questions. Yes, we do envision this work being something that is an experience for all of our students. And because we really are trying to make systemic shifts. So we're not trying to have events that kind of happen here or there. And, you know, we hope for the best. We are looking for this to be, you know, integrated into our curriculum and part of that work. And so I do want to give just a little background on the creation this year of those discussion documents and selection of texts. Just coming into this year, coming off of our closure last year and still living in this COVID environment, we really had to bend and flex how we typically did some of our professional development, knowing that our teachers were going to be teaching in a whole new environment this year, and they needed to be able to acclimate to that environment and really get that under their feet before we introduced something new. And so we did create those discussion documents and select those texts kind of as like a first toe dip for our teachers, something that we didn't lose the momentum of this work, but that it was something that all of our kids could engage in and experience. And so we have leveraged that. The training occurred really through, we had some leadership training, and then it kind of trickled down through our faculty meetings where teachers have had training with and professional development around implicit bias, so that they can engage in these discussions and conversations through the text and feel comfortable with those creative conversations. But then also get an idea of the why behind this work and its importance. And so we've actually asked teachers then to help us further create and further the Strong Voices project. So as we move forward, we're actually coming together in March for professional development with an initial group of teachers to continue the creation of these, and then we'll roll those out and provide the training to help all of our teachers engage in this. And I know Kim already spoke to this a little bit, but we've also, we really will mirror this after over the past couple of years, we've created at every grade level, one integrated unit. And it looks at the ELA skills and concepts and married it with some of our social studies concepts. And they're all based on a novel or a touchstone text so that all students have access to a high quality, rigorous text, and then engage in an entire unit. And we were very careful, and that was completely developed with teachers side by side and then rolled out through professional development. So that actually occurred over the previous 2 years to this year. So we'll use that same format as we move forward. And again, those novel units are integrated units. We have those really K through 8. And so every student is experiencing that unit. And Kim, do you have anything else to add?
You covered it really well. Great job, Chrissy. I do just want to, just as a further detail, I've seen in some of the Q&A a question around like specific training for teachers, recognizing that a lot of teachers feel nervous about diving into some of these topics. We have some ongoing professional development office hours I'm offering over the next 4 weeks. as some of these units and texts are being delivered through instruction, so that teachers can come and just ask questions, process through potential issues that might be on their mind, problem solve if something becomes a little outside of what they were hoping for. We really want teachers to feel supported through this process so that they can walk through it. We want the experience for the students and the teachers to be one that is that promotes their growth and that is highly engaging and positive.
Becky, any follow-ups? How do you feel about what we've offered as a response?
Okay, there's my button. That was really great and helpful information. I appreciate it. And just a quick shout out to thank you for all of you for doing this important training. As a parent, you know, I try to engage my child and teach her about differences and things like that, but to know that it's happening district-wide and moving in the right direction, I just very much appreciate it. So thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us tonight, and taking the time and for being engaged and promoting this work. So before I get to Jenna, you know, one thing I thought about, we have Dr. Javon Hunter listed up there as being a resource for us. And we've talked a little bit about that, how he's influenced our administrative team and how that has then dominoed into the planning for our faculty meetings. But again, I want to offer it up. Just, can you give us some more details specifically about what he's offering us, and then how that's impacting our work with our staff and thereby our instruction?
Sure. So Dr. Javon Hunter is a professor from Buffalo State and is really pretty well known in this region. He's worked with several districts and even organizations like the Rochester Area Literacy Collaborative to not only build understanding around implicit bias and how that impacts just our ability to meet the needs of all of our students, but also around how to really capitalize on what students bring to the table in terms of their culture, in terms of their funds of knowledge, the depth of their experiences, and how we can really leverage those in the classrooms, and how we can craft meaningful learning experiences using those as the vehicle. And so he's worked with our leadership team really since the start of the school year to kind of frame our understanding around implicit bias. He's introduced us to some new tools that we'll be taking a look at, and one of them being out of NYU, a culturally responsive curriculum scorecard. It's a tool for us to really conduct an audit and to use a variety of different stakeholders to help us do that. We introduced it to our coalition at the last meeting and plan to dig in a little more deeply in the weeks to come, but also our own district curriculum council and our own faculties to use that as a gauge to determine our ability to really represent students within our curriculum, what we teach, but to also take a look at the social justice components embedded within them, and to make sure that we are seeing our students reflected in the text that we use, the notable scientists that we're highlighting, and the work that's being shown, so that all students can see themselves in a positive light. And so Dr. Hunter has graciously offered to continue this work with teachers and through the spring and perhaps even into the summer to conduct some staff development so that they can also craft units and lessons around culture and around funds of knowledge. And so we're excited to roll that work out to staff again later in the spring and into the summer. Chrissy, Kim, anything else to add?
So I'm going to give us a 2-minute warning. I just want to be conscious of people's time tonight. I really appreciate you being able to join us in the conversation we've had. We're going to close it out with Jenna. If we could bring up Jenna, Jeff. Thank you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Welcome.
Oh, well, I want to thank you for taking my question a second time. I hope I'm able to share the air. I don't want to take up the whole meeting here. So the question that I put on there about diversity, having a month for a specific group being problematic, I just wanted to put that bug in your ear. I know that society has kind of created these placeholders in our calendar, but by doing that, it also creates other problems, making students feel like making them stand out or separate in those times. And so really, I just wanted to kind of stick that bug in your ear as you're thinking about curriculum for the year.
It's a good bug. I appreciate that. Thank you. Kim, I saw your mic come on. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, I wanted to thank you, Jenna, for keeping that in our forefront. We couldn't agree more with that sentiment. And we are very conscious of that as we are going through our curriculum. And it's definitely central in our minds. So I just wanted to thank you for that point and make sure you know we hear you loud and clear.
Well, thank you. The discussion tonight was wonderful. I really appreciate the work that all of you are doing. So I know sometimes I feel like I'm just throwing out the negatives, but I really do appreciate all of this work. So thank you very much.
You're welcome. And so with that, I just want to again thank everyone that was able to join us tonight. Thank you to our panelists. These leaders in collaboration with other leaders, both administratively and through our teachers and with our staff at large, are really making some great gains and strides towards where we want to be. But we recognize that this is a journey, and but it starts with an initial step, and we've certainly taken a few steps, and we're going to take many, many more here together. And so Mr. DeVeronica reminded me that we do have 2 additional community conversations coming up this year. The next one is in March, so look for more information about that, and then we'll wrap up the year with one in May. And the one in March, we're going to try to focus in on safety and security and just share some information and have a conversation around what we're doing to keep your students and our staff physically safe, but also socially, emotionally, and mentally safe and well. So I saw just one, let me just check for one last question. So 2 quick questions. The first one, I just want to make sure I check for understanding. So Gretchen, if I'm not understanding this, just please let me know. When will parents see this happen? And I think it was around probably Jenna's question, some of the explanations there. I haven't heard anything about this from teachers or principals from my kids. Am I interpreting that correctly? Thumbs up in the question, Gretchen. Maybe we can pull her up, Jeff. Just as we wrap things up, I just want to make sure we don't leave any loose ends here. Hi, Gretchen.
Gretchen's mic should be open.
Okay, I just had to move from where my kids were. No, I hear what you're saying, and you're mentioning that you're doing these things at school, but I haven't heard anything from any of my kids' principals. I haven't heard my kids talking about any of these activities or initiatives. So I haven't seen it in newsletters or emails. So when are we going to actually see these programs, books, discussions actually happen?
Well, I think that's a fair point. And this is, I think, evidence of our need to continue to be good communicators. And, the last part of why we're here tonight, being inclusive with folks. And so I'll take that comment back to our building principals, and certainly we can work on making sure that we weave some of that work into our building newsletters. I think, just from a superintendent standpoint, when I watch our social media feeds, I'm seeing some consistent and fair, great evidence of the work that we've discussed tonight. And And I would say as far as, sorry, Gretchen, I lost the last piece of that. Can you just repeat the last piece?
No, I just knowing what activities were actually happening and when,
Yeah.
because
Yes.
I haven't heard anything about this either through, you know, the newsletters that are sent home from the schools or communications from my kids' teachers or from just talking with my kids. Like I haven't heard anything about any of this. So I think while this sounds like a great plan, I just want to know what's the timeline for actually implementing it. Have you already started doing these and we just as parents don't know about it yet? Or is this still something that you're developing and it'll be in the future?
No, Gretchen, we've absolutely started the work. And again, going back to where I started there, I think that a realization, maybe an aha that we had this year was that this work has been happening. We've started this work a number of years ago and it's been ongoing and it's been building and it will continue to do that. But we recognized that there was a lack of awareness and you're reflecting that now. And so we need to continue to work on that and explicitly, but also create opportunities for those, for that connectivity and that communication. So working as a district, obviously we have this, but we're going to be adding more publications, district newsletters, specifically around curriculum instruction. So you'll see a new one coming up in March. Like you talked about with the building principles, we'll be a little bit more intentional and explicit around our communication there. And I'm going to turn it over and offer it up to Karen and Chrissy and maybe Kim as to what your students may experience, even if it's subtly in the classrooms, or maybe we have to be a little more intentional with them about the why. What are your thoughts on that, ladies?
Yeah, I agree. It's a really fair point. I would say with the initial work of some of the read alouds that we've mentioned in the documents, as we continue to grow that more, that would be something that we can communicate out. It might be through the newsletter, but also through just hopefully the conversations that are occurring in the classroom. So I would say the first go through again was us a little bit trying it out, and our first attempt at just helping to get the teachers get really engaged. So it's definitely ongoing work. And so we'll continue to think about how we also wrap in not just our parents, but our community to the Strong Voices projects as we look at that K through 12. And Karen, did you have?
Yeah, I did. I popped into the chat. So it's early in its inception, but in addition to all of the COVID resources and updates and information, because really that has been a lot of the communication through the year as circumstances shift and change. But we're really trying to build a repository of information around the whole child. And under that umbrella of the whole child certainly is components of wellness, components of social emotional learning, and certainly equity, diversity, and inclusion. And one of the questions was around keeping track of, I think Maggie asked it, keeping track of the work of the coalition. And so really having updates and information as we develop some of those questions for our framework and go through some of the curriculum audit types of activities using the curriculum culturally responsive scorecard. Those kinds of updates will be put on the website too. It's a static place. You have to be looking for it, we recognize, but certainly that's also an opportunity to share some of the information that's happening district wide. And then in terms of the building and perhaps the secondary level, Kim, I know you've been really involved with the Heritage Months and communicating some of that through Peak with our students and some of that work. Do you want to speak at all to what parents and that?
We're doing a lot of work explicitly around engaging in courageous conversations. Students have helped participate in the planning of those lessons, in addition to teachers and building administrators at the high school and at Dake as well to varying degrees. What has also been a big component to this work is ensuring that teachers are on board with us all the way. And so as a result of that, some teachers are going to dive in head first. They're ready, they feel prepared, and they're ready to go. And so those lessons will feel very explicit in the classroom. Other teachers are taking their first steps and aren't quite sure exactly what it's going to look like for them within their instructional practice. And so as a result, it might not feel as explicit to the student, though the work is happening through the sources that are being chosen or the topics that are being addressed in class. And so as time goes on and teachers find their footing and feel more and more confident, I think that students will be more able to speak explicitly to some of this work on their own.
I like that, Kim. I appreciate that. And I think that takes us right back to our lesson planning and learning targets, right? And so I think you're starting to see these things surface in our classrooms. And I feel like that's going to be an attachment point for our students as well. Well, again, I want to thank everybody for your time tonight. Thank you to the panelists. We will keep this conversation rolling, like I said, in March around safety and security. And I hope you guys stay safe and warm tonight, and we'll see you around the way. Thank you.